Okay, let's talk through our agenda here. So the very first thing I want to do, and I think if people want to shout out some schools they're interested in learning about, that might be really helpful for me because then I can tailor a little bit of my observations and what I know about their admissions process. So if you want to shout out a school you're even curious about, it doesn't mean you're applying, then we can go there. But in general, I think it's important for me to make a note on like the scope of what we're talking about here when it comes to college essays, right? The college essay is required of every single school, especially the main personal statement, the Common App essay. But when it comes to certain schools, like selective schools, and I will define what that means in a moment, um, there's much, there are often more essays, there's much more of a methodology to it, there's something they're looking for. Great UNC Chapel Hill. We just finished up with a lot of those. UNC Chapel Hill. Oh, great. And we'll talk about some UC questions. Kara, I'm sure you are thinking about those as we speak, as they're due at the end of the month. Um, Beautiful. Okay, good. This is all like about in the range that I was thinking. All of the information that I give you when it comes to selective admissions definitely is going to help you, even if you're applying to schools that are out of that scope. So that's the way that I would think that I think there's definitely great information to take from everything. So I know that we have a couple of like we have a good amount of juniors, so I will probably glide over that you've just submitted your early applications, but I'll talk about it because we've got some seniors. Um, we're going to go through essay topic breakdowns, and what I mean by that is the different supplemental essays that you're likely to come across as you are completing your college applications, because there are very common topics and there's a bit of a strategy to this. Next, we will go about how we streamline the essay development process here. And finally, I want to give you a few case studies. I think that's incredibly important in the world of college advising because not one singular thing is going to be the thing that gets a student accepted to a school or rejected. So we need to keep an eye on that holistic part of admissions. And when it comes to highlighting a great essay can be a great essay, but you really can't pinpoint the student success unless you look at everything else that is involved in their application. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to dissect a couple of applications. I'll take you through a couple of students of mine and the process that we went through to come up with their Common App essay, as well as some supplemental essays. And then we'll kind of try to decode why we think they were successful, what we liked about their applications, what we didn't. No application is perfect, right? But a perfect application, I guess, in my view, is an application that really represents the student super accurately, authentically, really well. It sounds like it's in their own voice, and shows off their best qualities, essentially. So that is what is on our agenda tonight. And thank you all for giving your schools. So, someone had already mentioned Stanford, and here we are. We've got a quote from the former Stanford admissions officer, Alex Coupe. Um, this is sort of the like thesis statement of how I like to coach students on writing their essays. So, Alex says, we were all adolescents at one point, and there's an emphasis on being quote unquote normal. But I'm liking the way that students more frequently now are willing to be weird and willing to be themselves a lot more. Colleges are definitely looking for that. He says, admissions counselors are human, and if 100 kids say the same thing, we can get a little tired of mundane stories. And so we are looking for stories that are going to be distinctive. Um, this is a really important point. So, hundreds of essays, literally hundreds of essays. Anyone have any idea how long, on average, an admissions officer might take to look at a student's application? You can throw out some guesses.
30 minutes.
30 minutes. Thank you, Martha. 30 seconds. Okay. We're meeting in the middle here a little bit. Thank you for both of your guesses. Honestly, when it comes to one admissions officer, like in their one round of viewing an application, it's probably 5 to 10 minutes. And that's all of the information. That's not just the essays. So think of the experience of an admissions officer. They are coming to work. They are then reading about 70 applications per day in their busy season. And they're trying to basically grab whatever sort of impressions that they can get from this student that really stick out. Um, some things that are really common to write about, often admissions officers are human and they can glaze over, so what you always want to be thinking about is, okay, what's my weird, what is my quirk that I think can stand out a little bit, maybe get that LOL moment like Kate was referring to from the teacher. That's sort of what we're looking for. And it doesn't have to be humor. It can also be this was an amazing insight, or like that story was really compelling. But we want something that really moves people. That's what's going to wake an admissions officer up from just plowing through all these essays, and really get them engaged in your application and get them fighting for your application. So, one last thing I want to say about this is that I think there are a lot of misconceptions about what weird means or standing out means, and I think a lot of students always come to me and they say one of two things. They say like, okay, I have this really traumatic experience and I think that I should write about that, or they say I don't have anything traumatic that happened to me, so I don't have anything interesting to say. Um, writing about trauma and writing about really, really adverse circumstances in your life is not necessarily what these admissions officers are looking for. I think there's a lot out there on the internet that says something to that effect. I think it'd be really hard to write about traumatic experiences. It puts a lot of pressure on you because you're also trying to make it, a narrative essay. And that's really hard to do in 650 words. So when we say weird, I want us to think about this word weird not as like what's something bad that happened to you or what is like your big story. It's more, what are these little qualities that maybe my friends rib me about, that I have that I could write about? What are the things that are a little bit more focused and small about me that set me apart? And I will share some student examples of that, obviously, because it's a little bit of a vague term. But all right, let's jump into defining selective admissions here. So here at TestEv, and you'll find this generally at any college advising company with any department, 20%, 25% acceptance rate or lower. That means essentially for every 100 students that applies to a school, every 20 or 25, only 20 or 25 get in, right? We define that as a highly selective school. What this means is it's a reach for everybody. It does not matter how many science Olympiads you won. It doesn't matter if you have the most amazing research project or are valedictorian or any amazing accolade. And it's not to dismiss those accolades, but this is generally how we look at it, because these selective schools are so what admissions officers call rejective. They don't even call them selective anymore. It's really difficult to stand out, right? Now, there are 2,600 four-year institutions in the US, and the selective schools that we're talking about, the UNCs, the Stanfords, the UCLAs, those occupy maybe 50 to 100 of those 2,600 schools. So we're going to be talking about essays tonight, and that is definitely a really important part of the application process in general. But when you're thinking about what colleges to apply to, it's really important that your entire list is not all of these just highly selective schools. And there are tons and tons of amazing options outside of those 50 to 100 schools that might be able to give you funding so you can leave school not in debt, that have that academic program that you're looking for. That would be great for career placement. And so what we always want to see is, definitely shoot for the stars and apply for those really selective schools that give that are exactly, state schools are incredible. Like there was a study in Forbes pretty recently saying that the best return out on investment outside of what they call the new Ivy, which is obviously Ivy League schools, but then your Dukes, a couple of other ones that are again in that 25% acceptance rate or lower. Um, the next best return on investment in terms of a college education is going to be your state institution. So that is definitely something to look at. And in terms of funding, there's a lot available there. So that's just something to keep in perspective. I think we all can get definitely a little bit, I mean, I certainly have, this is my career, and get a little overoccupied with like, what are these 50 schools looking for? exactly how can I ensure that like I'm going to get in. The bigger picture of a college education is that it's an incredible privilege no matter where you're going. There are certainly tricks you can employ and things you can do to help your odds at these more selective schools, but there are so many good options out there that are financial fits and that are also academic fits that would be really excited to have a highly qualified student come to campus. And that also have other really highly qualified students come to campus, right? Because it's not like all of the qualified students are going to those schools only, right? There's so many qualified students and they have to go somewhere. So that's my little caveat. But what we're talking about tonight is a little bit more on the selective side of schools. So, I'm going to give you a little history lesson here briefly, and I will try not to, to bore you well. But basically, in 2018 or so, there was a court case raised by some former Harvard students that accused them of essentially discriminating against their profiles. They were Asian American students. They felt like their profiles were really, really incredible and that they were discriminated against because of their race. And instead of being accepted, other students that were less qualified gained acceptance instead of them. This case actually was elevated to the Supreme Court, which was for admissions officers obviously really interesting and a very important event, but everyone was really, really excited because all of this information was going to finally come out about how schools like Harvard uh, conduct their admissions process. Someone likened this to like the recipe of Coca-Cola. It was that exciting to people because there really is no transparency, honestly, when it comes to the overall admissions process. Colleges aren't incentivized to share what their methodology is. And so the only way we really could find out about what a school like Harvard does when it comes to evaluating a student is through these depositions through the Supreme Court case, right? And so it's a very long document. And I poured through it a couple, like quite a few times. In general, the broad strokes of this are that there are multiple stages to viewing an application, right? There are 5 or 6 rounds. Ultimately, it ends in committee where an admissions officer is vouching for the student and advocating for their place in on campus, right? Um, Before that, it actually goes through a couple of screenings. And the way that Harvard is known to score their student applications is in 4 categories. One thing to note is that while other highly selective or highly rejective schools might not have this exact same methodology, admissions officers have confirmed that there's something very close to this, right? Where they're kind of breaking down these categories and giving numerical scores. So it's something that is applicable. It's not going to be exactly the same, but it is a good thing to look at because now it gives us a little bit more wisdom into what admissions officers are prioritizing and what they're evaluating for you. So the 4 different categories, these might surprise people. So we have academic, we have extracurricular, we have personal, which we'll definitely talk a lot about, and then we have athletic. Um, is there any one that's like specifically surprising to people? I mean, I think for me, when I first saw this, I thought, well, athletics are extracurriculars, and what if a student doesn't play a sport, right? Are they going to get the lowest possible score, and is that going to ruin their average? And it doesn't quite work like that. So when it comes to athletics, that score I'll take you through it in a moment, but it really means, is the student going to be recruited? Is the student like a recruited tennis player or, crew team member? And that's what a 1 athletic score is, right? So the highest score that you can get is going to be a 1. In some cases, it's a 1 plus. They do pluses and minuses in some specific cases. We also have the personal score. We'll talk about what that looks like in a moment. The extracurricular score and the academic score. Academic score is going to be the most important. I'm actually going to be able to take you through all the data points of like the specific breakdown of if you get a 1 in each of these categories, what are your odds of getting in? So we'll take you through that in a moment. Any questions about this? In general, just summing it up, You're going to be evaluated on a specific amount of categories. At Harvard, it's four, but they're always going to have something to do with academics. They'll have to do with your personal score. They will have to do with extracurriculars. And athletics obviously will play a part, especially if you're a recruited athlete. Okay, let's talk about the academic score, which is definitely the most important score. So when it comes to academics, what we're looking at here is a couple of things. So obviously GPA, class standing, course rigor is very important. Um, when it comes to a place like Harvard, how they define a one is going to be different how than how, another school is going to define a one. So later on, I'm going to take you through a student who applied to Wake Forest. A one for Wake Forest. Wake Forest is an amazing school, by the way. A one for Wake Forest might look a little bit different than Harvard's one. Think about it more as like percentiles. Like, so top 10% of all applicants, I would think of as a one of all applicants to that specific school. So when it comes to academics, obviously we want course rigor to be the student has taken the most challenging courses that their school can offer. Class rank is top 5% of their class or top student in their class. They will look at GPA. They will also look at academic awards. They'll look at competitions that you've won, if you do any Olympiads or things of that nature. Um, and 1 second, excuse me. If anyone is not muted, if you could go ahead and make sure you're muted, that would be great. Thank you. Um, so one thing to note here is that it's a common myth that if you have a 4.0 and a perfect SAT, then you are a shoo-in for a highly selective school. Instead of that, I would actually think of academics as a pre-qualifier, right? So it's something that if you hit that certain benchmark of being valedictorian or being highly rigorous or being like an incredibly talented academic student, then you are in the running to be considered for admission, right? So if you aren't, then that kind of knocks you out of the pass. What I will say is like there are obviously, and this is something I just looked up recently. I don't know if anyone knows how many US valedictorians there are. I did look it up. We have about 40,000 just in the US alone. And then when it comes to Ivy League freshman seats, we've got about 15,000. So obviously it is a pretty stacked competition. That's why we think of academics as, if we're looking at a student's profile and we see certain things like, okay, they've taken as many APs as they could have. Their GPA is near perfect. They're at the top of their class. Like those are all things that say to me, okay, you are a really qualified candidate for applying to these schools. But then my next question is, okay, what else? Like what else do you have going on? Um, okay, let's talk about extracurriculars. So again, this is by Harvard standards, and the reason why I'm talking about Harvard specifically is just because they give very specific language, right? Like they give their own descriptions of how they define a one, which is really helpful for us to think about when we're thinking about other schools. So for Harvard, a one in extracurriculars is like a national level contribution, a professional contribution. Often they can quantify it to, if your business is making a revenue of $100,000 or more, that would probably make you a one extracurricularly. Um, a two or a one is like fantastic. So like if you are, if you have a lot of leadership positions through your school and through community organizations, that definitely is a huge plus, right? Um, you don't have to play a sport to get a one or a two extracurricularly. That is one thing that is very important to note. So anyone who, and I feel like this is something that people tell me often is like, oh, my student doesn't play any sport. They're like, is that a problem? And it's not. As long as there is something in other areas that show real commitment, focus, and like a lot of time and effort put into the extracurricular. So these are kind of the general categorical breakdowns. A two or one is fabulous. So there is opportunity, if you are in a leadership position at your school or you're or you founded a club or done anything that's a little bit more self-starting, I think that is something that always looks great. A lot of talk of passion projects. Passion projects probably put you in a 2 to a 1, depending on your impact, right? So the more scalable your impact, the more you impact not just your school, but your community, or your city or your state. That's when you start thinking about really like amping up your extracurricular profile. Okay, let's get to the weird one, which is personal, because that's a tough one to nail down, obviously. Um, to really, and I've done a lot of reading about this, to really nail down what a personal score means. One admissions officer at Harvard actually wrote this down in a student's application file, and I think it summed it up really well, which is what kind of roommate would this person be? What kind of person would they be on campus? That's what the personal score is trying to get at, right? That's not something that's quantifiable. We call this a soft factor, right? There's not going to really be a data point that if you hit that, then you are going to get a personal one. But I mean, you can sort of see the way that Harvard is talking about it. Truly outstanding qualities of character. The student may display enormous courage in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles in life. Singular ability to lead or inspire those around them, extraordinary concern or compassion for others, unqualified and unwavering support from their recommenders. So what makes up the personal score? What are they looking at when it comes to the personal score? 100% the essays. Absolutely, absolutely the essays. There's no better chance in your college application to give a sense of who you are as a person than your college essays. Literally, what do you talk like? What do you sound like? What do you care about? That is what the essays are all about, right? And then we have recommendations, which are incredibly important. We're not going over this tonight, but recommenders actually have to rank students basically in the top in different categories. So one example would be, okay, like in terms of the student's ability to write, would you rank them as one of the best that you've ever experienced in your career? Would you say they're in the top 5% of all students that you've taught, the top 10%, and it goes all the way down, right? That is something that's going to factor the personal score, not just because of, like talking about their academic abilities, but they're also talking about who they are in the classroom. They're talking about who they are at their school. Guidance counselors highlight the student's entire development from freshman year to senior year. All of this to say, if you haven't put in some time with your guidance counselor, you want to start thinking about that now. They're a great resource to you, but also you want to develop a really good rapport with this person who's going to be writing your recommendation. Extracurriculars are also a great way to show what you're interested in and will go towards your personal score. There's a little bit of a weird overlap on the Venn diagram there, but that's okay. This is not complete rocket science, right? So what you do with your time obviously says a lot about you as a person. And so they will factor in what you do with your extracurriculars into the personal score. Family and geographic background, that's definitely a big one and something that students often don't know to write about is if they have a family contribution or a family responsibility. Like I've had students who work in their family restaurant who are involved in caretaking their grandparents. That is all stuff that's really important to write about because it's stuff you do with your time. Um, it shows how you are in the face of sometimes adversity, but also it shows that you're there to support your family. Those are all really, really important things that definitely count towards your personal score. Students don't think to write that in their activities section, but it's definitely something that I recommend if it is an overall time commitment. So yeah. All right. Any questions about extracurriculars? I don't want to spend too much time on this. We got to get into the essays, the good stuff. Okay. So this is generally Harvard's overall score of 1, right, for personal. So all recommenders say that you're probably one of the best students or greatest people that you've encountered in your career, right? You might get a rec letter from someone for an extracurricular that is really singing your praises that you spent a bunch of time on. That's a really great way to edge your score up to a one. Um, but in general, like it's a little bit the personal score kind of boils down to, well, are you a likable person who is gonna make great contributions on campus, and are you going to be a good roommate, a good person, right? That's what the personal score is about, which I think a lot of people were sort of surprised that that was given as much weight, because I think historically sometimes college applications have been a lot about just academics um, and essentially, yeah, pretty much academics, like in SAT scores. So things have obviously changed, and this is part of the byproduct of schools getting way more selective is they just have decided, well, we got to look at a more holistic picture of the student and what they're going to be like on campus, and that's going to help us predict their success. So real quick, athletics. If you get a four in athletics, it's fine. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't. This isn't a clean average breakdown of the four scores, right? It's just basically taken out from your overall score. So, examples, and this is, I think, from 2 years ago, but if you have an academic rating of one, then you are looking at a 60% admission rate. The highest rate, in terms of admissions rate, if you're getting a one, is athletics, and that's literally because if you are a one, then you are being recruited to play on campus at that school. So chances would be really high, like unless something happened, like you would it's true, Kate. Unless something happens disciplinary related or anything like that, then you're pretty much a shoo-in if you're being recruited by the Ivy League team, right? So if we're looking at our chances of, multi-dimensional candidates, quote unquote, or well-rounded, and there's a lot made of the spike versus well-roundedness. If you get three ratings or two of two, or one rating of three or four, and one rating of three or four, that's still a pretty good odds, 43% admissions rate. But if you're at four ratings of two, and if you're at four ratings of two, you get 68% admissions rate. So you don't have to be one and then twos, right? You can have really solid for all four categories, be in that two category, and you still have pretty decent odds. Where it starts to kind of fall apart or your chances decreases when you don't have a one or two at all. And that is a 0.1% admissions rate. So what we can take from this data, I mean, certainly sticking out and leaning into one specific category is going to be really important. Athletics is a great linchpin, but not all of us have the time, money, and like talent to be able to do that. I certainly didn't. So then what we have left is academics. We also have this personal score, right? Which does have like quite a bit of impact. And so that's something where the essays hold a lot more power than you think when we're thinking about selective admissions, right? If you were really thoughtful about the way that you wrote your essays and you had a lot of experiences to write about and a lot of great ideas, and you felt like your essays were really authentic to you, then that increases your chances of getting closer to that one in the personal score. The extracurriculars would have to line up, right? Like you'd want it to be consistent. But there's opportunity there. It's opportunity you have control over. Everyone's going to try their best when it comes to academics, right? But extracurricular, personal, those are things that you can really work on if you're strategic about it. Okay, let's get to the big fun time, which is let's talk essays. Quick question. Who here in the audience has anyone who's finished their personal statement and applied to some programs early already? Anybody? Maybe not. Okay. All right. So we got some younger folks, or we have people maybe waiting for the regular decision round, which is great because then um we can really talk about the personal statement in depth. You probably don't have anything to work with yet. So let's talk about what makes a great personal statement. And first I'm going to define the personal statement, obviously. people call this different things. I call it the personal statement. Some college advisors call it the Common App essay. The personal statement is that 650 word essay that you submit that goes to essentially every college that's on your list, right? So Stanford, UNC, UCLA. UCLA is an exception, which we'll talk about in a moment. But they have their own version of this, right? Um, for any school that's on the Common App, you are looking at submitting the 650 word essay that has 7 different prompt options. One thing that you're going to notice is that I did not include the prompts on this presentation. That is on purpose. That is not an oversight. I pretty much never have a student that I'm working with start by looking at the prompt for the personal statement. In general, what I'm looking to do is leading with the content that the student has that I know is going to be the strongest. Um, there are 7 prompts though, and the last one is a topic of your choice. So we kind of sweep those to the side and we just get right into the student and, thinking about what's the best story that I want to tell about myself. So, um, topic selection is obviously a kind of make or break thing when it comes to the personal statement. I talked about one topic selection that might be a little bit difficult, which would definitely be writing about a trauma that you had that might not even be resolved yet, right? And some of these bullet points of do's and don'ts for the personal statement kind of get to why that's difficult. So if you're writing about a problem that you experienced, do you spend no more than 1/3 of an essay describing it? A third is a pretty good ratio for me. A third of presenting the problem, and then the other 2/3 are all about what you did with it, how you internalize the lessons that you took from that obstacle, right? And how you have applied them now. Um, when you're writing about a major obstacle, though, it's really hard to write about that in 150 words, right? Which is about what, like a third of 650 is, or 100 to 200 words. It's really hard to nail down, and there is another opportunity for you to talk about these big obstacles that you faced that we're going to talk about in a moment. So, in general, one thing that I would think about when we're picking topics for a personal statement is go to somebody that has experience specifically with working on the college essay. Um, for the most part, students that come to me with topic ideas, we are not writing about the first thing that they thought of. And that's often true of anything, that I write. Like I think that your first idea is often not the best one, and you have to do a lot of digging to get to the really good stuff that kind of encapsulates you. It's always a little bit of a labor of love here. So, uh, I think topics that work really well are topics that are incredibly narrow and focused. So I will give some examples now. So I have one student who is he will remain in my memory for the rest of my life. I think he's one of the funniest people I've ever met in my entire life. Um, and he was really struggling to figure out what to write about with his essay. I think he had struggled with academics a little bit. And so we were at a bit of an impasse. And he just, honestly, he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to write the essay. He was like, oh, this is so boring. Um, so we actually talked a long time. And we used our essay intake form, which I'm going to take you through in a moment. What he ended up writing about was this sort of battle of wills he used to have with his mother about making his bed. So she would always essentially call him and yell at him at school if he did not have military corners, if it wasn't made completely immaculately. This is not like your blanket is tucked in. This was a very specific way of doing it. And he really dug in for a super long time and decided he wasn't going to do it because it wasn't important to him. The way that he wrote this was just so in his voice and funny. The hook, I think, talks about him going to bed every single night and having to basically use all of his strength to get his blanket untucked because it's so securely in there. But what it ends up really talking about is his relationship with his mom, how, like, through this experience, he learned to, uh, you know, make concessions, and if something's not that important to you, you can still do it if it's important to somebody else, right? Like that's sort of what he landed on. He got into a really great school for his profile, and I think it just was one of those essays that was such a small topic, but it got so much of him in there. So that's what I'm always trying to do. I'm going to take you through a really good example of a personal statement in a moment as well, so you can kind of see other great examples. But here are just some general rules. You definitely want to start with a story that hooks you in the first paragraph. I talked about the amount of time admissions officers spend on essays, and I also talked about the volume of essays that they look at. So yes, you're going to want to pique the admissions officer's interest really early on. And so that's what the hook is for. Admissions officers will look at that hook and they will say, okay, do I want to keep reading or am I going to skim? And your challenge when you're writing the hook is, okay, I want to challenge you and I want to inspire this admissions officer to really read and not skim. So that's incredibly important. If you start in the past, you get to the present really quickly. And present meaning last 2 years, right? So if you have a childhood story that's like a little bit of a superhero origin story, that's great. You just don't want to spend a ton of time on that when you're writing about it because who they're looking to apply is not you as a child, right? It's you now. If you're writing about your community or family, do you work yourself in, right? Like, do you make it about you pretty quickly? Um, the essays, the college essays in general are the one space where like the rule of thumb is that you should make it about yourself. It really shouldn't be like in most other places, that's not what you do, but you should be looking at every single essay as an opportunity to tell them something new about yourself that will make them want to admit you. Do you try to tell just one story and not your entire life story? This is a big one. We don't want to see any. I was born in 2000. I'm scared to say what year you all were born in. It's probably 2008 or 9. I was born in 2008 in this town, and then this happened, and then this happened. That's definitely not going to, say anything about you, first of all, because it's too diffused, right? You're not digging deep into one thing. You're giving a survey of your whole life. And that's not quite what they're looking for. Does your essay say something new and personal about you that is not elsewhere on your application? Another way to put this, are you just repeating what's on your resume? Because if you are, that's the wrong way to go here, right? You want to provide a new personal dimension of yourself with the personal statement. Can I close my eyes and picture your story? Is there vivid imagery? Everyone in high school has definitely learned about um, imagery, visual imagery, and language that can really paint a picture. This is no exception. This is a great place for you to put those skills that you learned in school to the test and really challenge yourself and say, could a camera see what I'm writing? Or can people visualize? Can I visualize myself in this scenario? I'm hoping that the personal statement that I give you in a moment is a good example of being able to picture something. Um, does it make you sound unique and not like anyone else applying? One great thing to do is with, if you have a group of friends or even classmates, right? If you all have finished personal statements, do a blind trade and see if people can tell whose essay is whose. That's a really good way to be able to figure out, okay, am I getting specific enough? Am I getting to like the core of what I want to talk about enough? We've gone over the obstacle portion. And the last thing, is it written in your voice? So a quick note on that, which is that obviously when you're writing college essays, you want to sound impressive. You want to sound uh, generally exciting, and you want to sound smart. That does not necessarily mean that you should try to pack a bunch of stilted vocabulary into these essays. Again, we have to go back to readability. Like the biggest thing that I look at when it comes to a college essay outside of the story is going to be, is this easy to read? Do I understand what they're saying? Do they make their point really clearly? Because a tired eye is not going to be able to do the work of dissecting a really complicated metaphor. They just don't have the time to do that. So when you are writing your essay, I want you to initially write the way that you talk. There are opportunities to fancify the language later on, but again, this essay is supposed to be a representation of you as a person, and so it should sound the way that you communicate. Um, that's why I think often a dictation tool is really helpful when you're starting the essay development process, because that's something that will be able to take down your specific way of speaking, and it will help when it comes to actually putting the essay on paper. So there's great dictation tools that you can use that would probably get you started if you're one of those people that looks at a blank page and gets freaked out. Sometimes the workaround to that is sit down with a friend or a parent or a guardian or a cousin or anybody and just tell them the story and dictate it. That's often a really great way to get started. Okay, I'm going to have us all read an example of a personal statement. I guess just how was it? Just in the chat, just mark down when you're ready to move forward. I think that'll give us like 2 minutes basically per page. Okay, we ready? Remember, we want to read this fast too, just the way that an admissions officer does. Okay, okay, good. We got one more page. Okay, everyone done? Little group reading for us. Okay, curious to know thoughts. Definitely share your thoughts in the chat. I'm gonna give you a little background on this student because I think one thing that I'm gonna assume some people thought was like, well, this doesn't. This seems, this has a very specific voice. Like this is somebody who is really a romantic, I would say. Someone who is sentimental and like loves beauty and art. Um, and that's not every kid, right? This kid is very much like that. He's a painter through and through. He loves old films. He's a history buff. Like he's a really kind of old, hate to say this, a little bit of an old soul. But I think that it also is something that's very vulnerable, which I would definitely urge you all to try to find when it comes to the personal statement. Vulnerability doesn't have to be something like this. Like this was pretty loaded emotionally, I would say, like when you're talking about um, struggling with your body image, right? But sometimes vulnerability can sound like that kid that I was talking about before, who admitted that he incorrectly was like not listening to his mother, and was being a little bit stubborn, right? And that still counts towards vulnerability. It's saying like, I know that I'm not a perfect person. Anyone who's applying to college is 18 years old. You've made mistakes. And so, like, the worst mistake that you can definitely make when it comes to the college essay is imparting this image that you do everything and know everything perfectly, because that's definitely not anybody in the world, let alone 18-year-olds. So, I mean, I remember myself as an 18-year-old, and I definitely, my essay was pretty vulnerable as well, just in acknowledging your faults. And no college is going to look at that and say, oh, we're not going to admit this kid because XYZ, because they said this. I know, as I am humbling myself. Um, yeah, no college is going to look at an admission like this and, make that a reason to say no to a student or not accept a student. So obviously so yeah, Kate references the specific color names and how they popped in a really good way. Obviously, this is an essay about painting, so we wanted it to be pretty visual. We thought that the Van Gogh opener was strong in that it, obviously thematically related, which is Van Gogh has gone through a lot of different struggles, but has always really, really honestly represented himself as an artist, like, warts and all, like very, very confrontational of who he is. And that's something that we drew a parallel to in the student. Um, and I think the other thing is like we actually have what really kind of clinched it for me is we have these self-portraits. So we have these paintings, and the student submitted them as part of his application. And you actually really can see, like, it just works. It's consistent, and you see the change over the years. So, yeah, anything that we didn't like about it, because no essay is perfect. I think we struggled sometimes with the language, I will say. Like yeah. Amen, Marcus. Amen. Yeah, sometimes there was a little bit of like this student tended towards writing a little bit more academically and flowery. So it was always kind of like a push and pull of okay, what's too much? So we definitely worked on that a lot. All right. Good stuff. Let's move on here. So, okay. I've shown you a really good example of a personal statement. I want to talk just real briefly about the other parts of the common application specifically, because this kind of goes towards what I was talking about when it comes to writing about a really big obstacle in your life. Um, so say you do have a really big obstacle in your life and you want to talk about it because you feel like colleges need to know about it. Like it was a big factor maybe in your academics um or it just, or you moved a bunch or there's something like that that you feel is really important to discuss. Um that is a great place. The additional information section is a great place to do that. So, basically what the additional information section is, it's also a 650 word space. It does not have to be narratively written the way that last essay we just looked at was. right? If a student were to write about having to move 5 times, right? And that affected their grades. Some students might want to write about that for a personal statement. What I tend to believe is that that kind of stuff is better in the additional information section because you can just say really cut and dry, here were the events, here's what happened. It can even be bullet points. Here's how I dealt with it, and here's where I am now. Here are the positive outcomes. So it's a way less loaded and pressure-filled way to write about a topic that might be loaded to you. Um, this is also around like family conflict, um, and any like medical traumas that a student has suffered. Often the best place for that can be the additional information section. The prompt that they give for that is essentially, is there anything else that you would like us to know that will help us give further context in looking at your application? So, yeah, if you want to explain a bad semester you had and why it happened and how you've overcome it, excellent. That's a great use for the additional information section. The additional information section also, you have space to cherry pick your grades a little bit, right? So, say you had one bad semester, in the additional information section, you can say, here's why that happened. And also, here's my GPA for junior and senior year. They won't see that on the transcript necessarily, but if you can do that, right, you can put that data point in front of them in a way that might allow them to kind of look through that issue with grades, and see, okay, well, they're doing incredibly well now. So like that seems fine and they've overcome this, right? So that's one note. Like if you have something that you feel they have to know, that doesn't have to be in the personal statement. It can also go in the additional information section. The activities section is its own kind of beast. I would think of it as sort of a resume section, with the exception that you have 140 characters. So I don't know enough about Twitter. I think it used to be that Twitter limited your character counts, and it used to be like, oh, it's like the length of a tweet. So how do you describe an activity that you've done for 5, 7 years, often possibly like even your whole life, in 140 characters? That's less than 100 words. Um, so you got to kind of get in and get out quick, right? You have to quantify your contributions. If you managed a team of students, how many students was that? If you raised funds, how much? What were some skills you learned or utilized? Did you have to learn how to code or any specific coding language? You just want to bring as much detail in. I think an example of, a missed opportunity for an additional information section would be like, say you volunteered for Blue Cross Blue Shield, and your description is, held fundraisers. No, what we want to see is, okay, manage a team of 10 students to plan and execute X fundraisers raising X amount of money. Okay. So similar to if you've had to write a resume, this is generally the same feedback. So it should sound familiar to you. But that is generally like the idea behind the additional info essay, and the activities section. It's very important that these things talk to one another. So that's really key. And it's the same thing with the supplements. I don't want to be seeing any heavy repetition between the additional information section and the activities section. And same with the PS and the additional, like these things should all be providing new information. Um, and they should also be consistent language-wise, right? You don't want to be sloppy in your activity section and then have like a perfectly drafted um, personal statement, right? It just shows a lack of effort. So everything, when you ultimately finish your Common App, a really good thing to do is export it as a PDF and share it with somebody, an objective eye who's looked at applications a bunch. And they'll be able to say, hey, like this language doesn't quite work, or hey, even when it comes to punctuation, are you putting a period after every single activity description, or are you doing some in one and some in another? Like those are all things that show that extra level of care that will be important. Any questions about these three things? Oh, it did. Twitter did have limits. Now it doesn't, right? I'm trying to remember. Okay, good stuff. So now I want to talk a little bit about essay supplements. This is going to be basically the last of the written content you will be submitting to these colleges. So the process looks like this, right? So you would create your college list. One thing to note is that if you're applying to the UC school system and a couple of other schools, there are some other schools that are the same here, like MIT and Georgetown, they have their own application. So you want to make sure you keep an eye out for that. The UC system has 4 essays that you need to draft. They get thematically a lot. It's like the same prompt choices as the personal statement for the Common App. So likely you'll be able to recycle at least one of those and use your personal statement if you did that already. But that is something to just be aware of, like if you're looking at a place like UCLA. Um, so when you submit your application, your Common App, that's the first thing you complete, right? You're going to have your personal statement, your additional information section, you'll have the activities section, and then that will be done, right? And that is something that every single school sees that you apply to. Then we have the supplemental part of the application. So once you submit your Common App, then you might pick a school like what did we all say? Stanford or UNC Chapel Hill. I just finished a bunch of UNC Chapel Hill applications, so that's a really good example. So once you add UNC Chapel Hill to your list on the Common App, then you will also get school related questions, right? So what UNC Chapel Hill ultimately will see will be everything that's on your Common App, personal statement, activity section, additional information, and then they will have their own supplemental essays that they want you to answer. Supplemental essays really run the gamut. As a general rule, they are shorter than the personal statement, with a few exceptions. U Chicago, in classic U Chicago fashion, has an unlimited word count essay where they like have students come up with questions every year. It's fun. It's also frustrating because it's like so vague with the directive. But often you're thinking probably a short answer question all the way up to 500 words, maybe 650 words. The objective of the supplements is to get more information about the applicant, see how they might fit on campus. And generally, there are some really common topics when it comes to essay supplements. So I listed a couple of them down here. Why major? So why do you want to study what you want to study? I'm going to show you some examples of each of those in a moment, because every school has their own way of asking these questions, but you start to obviously notice the patterns pretty quickly once you look at a bunch of supplements. So why major? Then why the school? Why do you want to attend our school? Activity is just tell us, reflect on an activity that you spent a lot of time on. What was your contribution? Why do you like it? Things like that. And then community, tell us about a community that you're a part of. What is your contribution? I'm going to show you examples of all of these in a moment because I think some of those probably are weird to just think about without like seeing it on paper. Essay supplements can seem really annoying. Like I think a lot of students have the experience of I just did this whole essay. I just completed this like full application. Now I have to do these like annoying short questions. How am I supposed to say why I want to go to USC in 100 words? Like, how do I do that? And I feel you. I hear for you. I hear you. But also I think I like to think of it as an opportunity. I think every student has a ton of things that they could write about in their essays. And so when you get more supplements, that's just more opportunity for you to tell them something new about you. Um, and typically, like the process, and we'll talk about this in a moment, but typically the process of developing and writing, essay supplements, you can be very strategic about this so that you're not reinventing the wheel every single time on every single new supplemental essay. That's the worst thing you can do, right? You have enough going on when it comes to school and if you're taking the SATs still, like all of these things, the last thing you want to do is say I have to write a brand new essay for 20 essays or 20 to 40 essays. Like they can really pile up if you're looking at schools like Stanford and UCs and all that. So definitely there is strategy to this, but I think of supplements as a really great gift because it's just like one more thing that you can control in your application, right? One more new thing you can say about yourself. Um, I definitely think Kate has a great point, which is that when you are picking your list, you want to look at the essay supplements because sometimes a student will come to the list and will say, okay, let's sit down and let's look at how many essay supplements that puts in front of us. It can be 50 at times. If it's every school has 5 to 7 essays, it can really get onerous and unwieldy. And it's okay if that informs your list, right? But you do want to go in with eyes wide open to the work you have in front of you because these essay supplements, like, they're not something you want to be mailing in. You want these to be really strong. So you have to be realistic about like what your workload's going to be, how much bandwidth you'll have for this. Um, and then with someone you trust, like figure out a way to streamline the process, but definitely before you nail down that college list, check out the supplements and make sure that you're not totally overwhelmed by the prospect of doing them. So, real quick, I'm going to take you through our essay generation process at Testive. I think it's really important. So you can kind of see like how we do things here and ways that we can make this process that can take so many hours of your time. We're all about making this more efficient. So, to start, I'm going to show you actually a little sneak peek of our brain dump, and everyone who is still here also is going to be getting a homework assignment. So get ready for that. That would be exciting. You're going to get our essay intake. And for those of you who are juniors and or seniors who are still looking to apply RD, this intake is pretty strategic in the questions that it asks. It has questions definitely relating to the personal statement topics that I have found worked. So one question that it asks that might be surprising is like, what's something that you love to do, but you're also bad at? For me, the example is bowling. I'm the worst bowler in the entire world, but I have the most fun of all time every time I go bowling. I had a student who actually wrote an entire essay just about that one idea. He's like he's a very regimented person typically. The way he conducts himself, when I met him, he was very serious, like really, really academically oriented. But he told me actually that, when he when he gets home, like his way to decompress is he sings alone in his room and he kind of pretends to be a rock star, I guess. And it's a way that helps him process his emotions. He's horrible. He's like, I'm a horrible singer. My sister roasts me all the time about how bad I am, but it's something that I just genuinely love to do. Um, and I think that that essay was really successful because it shed a really like new and also funny and different light on this student who was really otherwise like pretty serious. It also shows like this is his outlet. This is how he processes emotions. This is something he's not too outcome oriented, which a lot of his application was about previously. So our intake is going to go over academic interests, extracurriculars, hobbies, personal values, interests, all these things, definitely quirks. So it's pretty involved, but if you put that time in to answer each question, according to the word count that we have in the intake, then you're set up for a really, really good, um, you're set up for success because you're covering a lot of topics that ultimately you're going to want to cover. So the next thing that we do once a student fills out an intake form is they work with one of our advisors, and advisors basically will get this intake form before the session. They'll come prepared with questions on themes or ideas that they find interesting and they feel will become something. And they start to essentially tease out a couple of application themes. So application themes are very important. We looked at, how a well-rounded student fares versus like a spiky student. But in general, what you want is like some cohesion to your application. And so that's why defining 2 or 3 application themes, they don't have to be academic. In fact, it's great if one is not. It's good to have one academic application theme, definitely, but you also want a personal one, right? And if there's something that you're really passionate about, like um, social justice or anything. Like you want that to be a theme of your application as well. So then we're basically from this intake form after we've looked through everything and done a long call together, the advisor and the student together say, okay, these are like the things that I want to isolate as my application themes. Here's my order of preference. Here's what's most important. Um, and then what we do next is step 3, which is gathering all of our essay prompts, which is the scariest part of the process because then you're thinking, oh my gosh, I have so much to do. Um, so definitely you want to do that because you need to know what's in front of you, right? Alongside the word counts. Gathering the prompts ahead of time is going to be really important because it actually dictates what we do first. Once we gather the essay prompts, we sort all of the topics. You're going to have a few why our school essays to write. So you want to put all those together. You're going to have why this major. You're going to have to write about your activities. You'll probably have to write about your community. So group all those essay topics together. Um, then we want to create templates. So, like I said, the worst thing that you can do is go why Michigan, why USC, why Stanford, and write brand new from scratch for every single one. We're starting from you, right? So, what do we want to say about you that we haven't said yet, right? This can be about academic interest. This can be about your values and what you want to experience in college. But again, every essay is an opportunity to say something new about you, right? So when we're looking at these different essays, these different supplements, and these topics, we're going to say, what do I want to say for this topic, right? What do I want to say for Y school? What do I want to say for community? I don't know why you would write one. Like I always have to do this as a student. I'm like, okay, you have a great community essay that you've already written. Why are you writing another one? Even if it is like a slightly different prompt, there's no need to do that, right? So definitely you want to lead with your best content, and like creating essay templates for each topic is the way that you do that. So you spend a good amount of time with your advisor just creating your part of that template and making the story great, making the language great, solidifying the language, all that stuff, right? So once the templates are done, then you tweak, right? That's all you do. So you've got basically the first part of your Y essay that's all about you. Now let's add some research about University of Michigan, right? That matches to what you've written about yourself. And then you're going to also tweak it for fit, research, and word count. The amount of time that this saves is pretty astronomical when you're looking at a big pile of essays. And it's also something where, if you were to write something brand new, then your content just gets worse and worse down the line, right? So this is an opportunity for us to lead with our best content through and through, right? And then, hey, like the stuff about the schools, that's what comes last, and that's counterintuitive, right? Because that's not what the prompt asked for, but this is the science of being a college admissions advisor. This is the wisdom that I have to impart on you. So, okay, let's talk through some common topics. I just want to be conscious of time here. It's 8:15. Okay, we're on track. We're going to try to finish probably by 8:30 or so, 8:40. I know it's a long night. And then we'll leave space for questions, but let's keep rolling through. So, I want to spend some time on this because I want you to see how different these can look. Um, so Carnegie Mellon, academic interest and or Y major. It's not always both, right? Sometimes it is what is just a topic that really interests you intellectually. Sometimes it just asks like what, it doesn't even ask what you want to study. Some schools will just say, what's something you could spend hours thinking about? Now, for the purpose of saving time, you know that you're also going to need to write a Y major essay. So when it comes to an essay that asks about what's something you could spend hours thinking about, double it up, right? Like double dip by all means. And spend the time explaining why you want to study your intended major. Use that for intellectual interest as well. It doesn't have to be something new. So you'll see here, like Carnegie Mellon asks about what passion, like why do you want to study what you want to study? Brown asks about generally what academic opportunities that they have interest you, so it's a little bit more wide brown as well. Wisconsin-Madison is a doozy. It's a long one. Um, and they ask really just cut and dry why major. It is tough, obviously, like and just have a 650 word limit. But again, there's also a method to this madness. What I would then say is, okay, if we're applying to these three schools, I want to start with Wisconsin-Madison, right? That's the longest essay. So you got to start with more content and then you're mining for gold and cutting down, right? By writing your why Wisconsin Madison essay first, then you've got the bones of the Brown essay. You just have to cut it down for word count and then add a little bit about Brown, right? Right. You kind of customize it. Um, so what you're doing is like, yeah, I'm creating a template by starting with my why major essay for Wisconsin Madison. And then I'm going to tweak that for Brown and for Carnegie Mellon. Makes sense to everybody? Okay, let's look at another common one, which is community. So community essay. This was one that really vexed me when when I first started working as an admissions consultant, because it's like, what do you mean by community? Thankfully, colleges do a really good job now of saying it can be family, it can be school, it can be global or cultural, it can be a group, it can be a virtual group. Like it can really mean anything, which is both nice and annoying, right? Because if you're like a creative person, I think many creative people thrive under specific boundaries. With an open-ended question about like what's your community and can be anything, it can be a little bit scarier, right? To think about what to do. This is where the essay intake comes in, the brainstorming intake. Go back through what you filled out and think, okay, what are some really significant groups for me? Um, and what's a story that I could tell about one of these groups? My role within it, like you want to have this be something where you take a really active role within the group. Okay. So not just something that you're in a group and you attend every week. No, it's like, what was your role within the group? What was it socially? What was it functionally? What were some things you learned? But generally, yeah, like define community in the way that it's most meaningful to you. Ugh, rough. But again, like the way that I think about it is, okay, what are some groups that you're in that you have a really active role in that can say something new about you? Sometimes it can be, you know, the simplest answer is the best one. Like if it has to do with like a racial identity that you are really passionate about, then amazing, right? But it doesn't have to be that. It can be something really small. So I've had students write about all kinds of different groups that they're a part of, sometimes online groups, and what they've done there. Often, like one student wrote about his competition team that he did for this economics competition. So there are definitely like many ways to approach this. But again, like what I would look at is, okay, look, we've got a bunch. Say we're applying to Cornell, Michigan, and Rice, right? So Michigan is about 500 as well, I'm pretty sure. So you want to start with the longer essays. I would probably in this case um start with Michigan. Anyone have any idea why I would recommend starting with Michigan here? I don't, I, yeah, so, so basically, I recommend this because Michigan doesn't have anything else that they ask about, right? They want 500 words on just community. Rice is saying you have 500 words, but you also have to write about how would you contribute it to the Rice community? It's talking about the residential college system at Rice, which if you know, like go look that up because it's great. It's very Hogwarts style, but it's really cool. So this is something that's probably leaves a little bit more room for why research on Rice, which tells me, okay, I want to first start with like, let's just do 500 words on my community, and then we'll be able to cut down to maybe 300 for Rice, and then have the other 200 words be about Rice itself, right? I would also then cut it down to 350 for Cornell, because it's really all just about community for Cornell, right? So you want to think about this in kind of parts, discrete parts. Um, and so like Rice's is a little bit of a two-parter in my opinion. I think it's open to interpretation, but if I were to start with one, I would probably pick Michigan for that reason because it's just community, and that's the one that, that's the umbrella under which we can develop the other content. Make sense to everybody? Cool. Okay, let's talk YS. Oh boy, it's the dreaded YS essay. Students hate it the most. I hate it the most. It's the worst. Like uh the very pretense of the YSA is sort of incorrect, right? What they always ask is, why do you want to come here? And then what students expect that they have to do is tell them why they want to come to that school. Um, that is expected. You do want to do that, but you actually don't want to spend as much time on that as you would think. What did I say about every essay, every supplemental essay? It's an opportunity to talk about you. So if you spend the Dartmouth essay, the Tufts and Carnegie Mellon essay just talking about how amazing the school is, right? Then that's a missed opportunity. These colleges know that you want to go there. There's quite a hint in that you had applied. So, so that's probably like their big tell that you're interested. And honestly, a lot of the reasons that students have for wanting to go to a school, colleges know that it has to do with prestige, right? Or it has to do with my family's gone there for a long time, or, this is going to be the best for like the job that I want. I think, colleges are not dumb and they are aware that these are the real reasons. So it's a little bit of mental acrobatics before you even get into the essay development. But here's what I always recommend when it comes to why essays. What's something new we haven't said about you? When it comes to these 100-word essays, I think it's a good idea to just jump into research immediately, and then just make sure whatever research point you have connects to you in some way. What they're asking with a why us essay is not tell us how great we are, although I'm sure they're fine with that. It's really like, why are you a good fit here? So there's a bit of a formula here, right? And so I want to take you all through this. So it is essentially something that the school has, you connect it to something about you, and then you talk about how you're going to be able to use whatever that school has to elevate yourself, whether it comes to your career goals or your personal goals or any values, anything like that, right? So it's you plus school plus you two together equals you two together. That is the formula that we want to have here, right? So the very first rule is make it about you. Again, horrible advice anywhere else, but great advice when it comes to college essays. Other advice, get as specific with your research as possible, right? So it is canon. Every first draft of a Y essay with the student is going to say, I want to take Ecology 101. Because that course will be really good for me because it will help me study whatever, blah, blah, blah. So anything 101 is going to be at any other school, so you don't want to choose that, right? When we're talking specificity when it comes to research, we want you to look into syllabi. We want you to look at, specific values and initiatives that the school has. One good example that's definitely overused, but like is a good reason, is Rice's residential college system. That's like a good example because basically the residential college system is you're sorted into houses. Each house has a theme, and then there are like field day competitions. You get a lot of house spirit, quote unquote, and it's really unique to the school. So whatever research you find, it must be unique to that school. Okay, that is really the key thing. So no ecology 101. If there's a specific major that like really, really connects to what you want to do, perfect, right? Don't cite prestige, ranking, or location. Even if you are applying to a school in New York City, don't do it. They've heard it too many times. If you're citing a student org or a class, yeah, here we go. Like, make sure it's not offered everywhere else. One really great thing to do is to talk about areas where you are not where you want to be yet. Actually, again, like this is getting more towards vulnerability. Um, but say like I haven't been able, I've struggled with finding like great research opportunities. I'm really interested in potentially becoming like a lab scientist, but I don't know what that looks like. X schools research program, has an incredible success rate and like a great matching rate, and I feel like that will best poise me to make the best decision about my career, right? Something you don't have that you want, the school has it. That's a great argument for fit. Try to make a values connection. So Wake Forest, they actually have a question about that in their essay supplement, um, which is like their motto is pro humanite, which is like for all of humanity. And they ask, well, what is something that you like that you feel in your life reflects that motto of pro humanity? What's something that you do for humanity, right? So they kind of like tell you that, right? But that's another thing that you can do without the school asking. Why Michigan? Okay, well, let's look up like some of Michigan's general values. Let's look at what students say about it on niche, and then let's connect that to like my values, right? And the last thing that I think is most important is brain dump your reasons for going to the school. All of them. Be honest. It's okay. The schools aren't going to see the brain dump. Just get it all out and then pick one or two that are a strong connection to you, right? That's going to be the most important. So you can still write in your brain dump prestige, location, because those are all real good reasons, like real and valid reasons to want to go to a school. But you also have to do the legwork of the other stuff, right? Like, what is my day-to-day life going to be there? What are the classes I want to take? What's a syllabus that really excites me? All that stuff, right? And then how is it connected to you and what you want to do in college? Any questions about the Y essay? It's always the most annoying part, but it is like also really tweakable, so that's nice. Okay, I have a really a good example of a Y essay. Now, I'm going to say this very honestly. I think there's a ceiling on how good a Y essay can be. I think it's not an interesting topic. I don't love the topic, right? But I think there are things that you can do. So everyone just read this real quick. And it's 8:30, so we'll start to kind of wind this down a little bit. But I think this is worthwhile for everybody to read. And do not be afraid to skim. That's what all these admissions officers do with you with these Y essays. I do think this is a good one though. And it is a bit of a plot twist, isn't it? Yeah, like a comment on that, which I think is a really good comment because that's probably something that admissions officers would think if they saw this in a vacuum. This student has a ton of teaching experience, like that's what a lot of his extracurriculars were. So in the larger context of his application, like this made sense, right? It definitely it talks about an activity that the student did, and I was really pushing this kid because I was like, okay, you talk about this research project, but I don't. He kept shying away from talking about it. And I was like, I gotta see some abstract here. Like, show me the research abstract, show me something. And what he started this essay with was really actually his experience at the summer pre-college program. Hot tip pre-college programs, and I'm sure some of you know this, but like a traditional pre-college summer program at a school is really not selective. It's a leg of the college business side of things, and it's not selective enough to really be viewed as prestigious. So, um, listen, it shows up on his resume, but I don't want this kid to belabor the point that he went to this pre-college program. What he initially wrote was how great of an experience he had, but then he was just like, yeah, we showed up early to class every day. And I was like, you don't have to say that. So, um, what he kept talking about was like this research project on social connection and how does it increase mobility, education clearly being like one of the biggest things that contributes to mobility. But part of the student's research abstract that I found with him was like he defines the different types of connections socially and how those are tied to job mobility, actually, specifically. That's what Granovetter studies. And this is why I love also working on college essays because I had never read about this and I was like, that's fascinating. So, what we ultimately did was like we made this connection of I studied these weak ties, and like that is something that will provide me like a ton of mobility when it comes to being on a college campus. And weak ties are actually, for him defined as a really positive thing, which is people that are different from me, who I might not be friends with, but I'm going to learn a ton from. And I already had that experience at BU. In this case, like it was just such an improvement because rather than have it be all about his experience at BU, which everyone knows, I feel like a summer program is nice, but like everyone knows what that is, so you don't have to tell them what that is. Like they're not, no one would be surprised to hear that a student enjoyed a pre-college summer program, right? But this at least gets a little bit more to like some of his academic interests. It does make an interesting argument for fit, right? Like the research I think works because it talks about improving mobility through education. But yeah, in general, it's just like a little bit of a cuter and a little bit more um, student-centered approach to a YSA, right? Like we get to BU really halfway through. And that's a good ratio. You do not want to spend the whole essay writing about the school because they know how good they are or how popular they are. Okay, last, we have the activity. This is probably the easiest one. Just more details. It's like expand on your number one activity in your activity section. Tell us more about what you did. Georgetown has their own annoying rules for this, their own application, but you'll see activities essay range from 100 words to 250. Again, I would start with Georgetown here and then cut down, right, to 250 and then 100, respectively. Okay, I'm gonna do a last little thing. I don't want us all to, I know it's getting late, so just showing you sort of the beginning, a little sneak peek of our college essay questionnaire, which I will send out to you all by tomorrow after the session. Um, so I tend to always start with this with my students, right? And so here's an example of a student that um, gave me permission to like look through this, but uh he's he is so great. And he filled out the essay intake really well. So this is Remy. He applied early to American University. Excellent grades. He goes to a French school and it's like not nobody from his school has applied to an American school before. So he's coming from a pretty under recruited area, which often can play to your advantage because he's, going to be the only one of his kind applying, only one from his school applying. So he'll stand out, right? So that said, though, he didn't really know anything about the application process, so he needed help. So definitely we worked on that brainstorming intake first. And then he and I met. So I'm going to take you through some of his answers because he made me laugh. And he's like a very, very charismatic guy. Like a lot of the things that you read here will make sense. I remember reading this and thinking, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting observation. It's difficult to me, accept that I can be wrong. like very, very staunch in his beliefs, very politically oriented. He's really enjoyed diversity because he's been able to understand that, like, he's gonna be wrong sometimes. Um, he's also a debater. So this is like a really big thing for him. I would say in terms of two application themes that we identified right away. And this is just even from looking at these two things, and he and I talked about this pretty exhaustively. Look at how many things he loves. He's so interested in so many things. Really highly, highly, highly curious person. Definitely somebody who will go do his own research on things. He is skilled at a lot of things and he likes a lot of things. And he talks about wanting to have multiple lives, to live multiple lives because then he could do multiple jobs. I found that really interesting. So definitely curiosity. Curiosity is like a very simplified way to put it, but curiosity, I would say fundamentally is like what one theme that we wanted to uncover. Um, Another theme was definitely this idea of he is like a really, really talented public speaker, like with tons of eloquence awards, a lot of things like that's like was his main activity. Um, and so I looked and I thought, okay, is there a connection between you being like a debater, right? And then having this kind of mindset of it's always difficult to me to accept that I am wrong, right? Because often a debater might like you have to come in really confident with your stance when you're giving a speech. Conviction is everything, right? And so he realized ultimately like that was part of the reason for his inability to accept where he was wrong. And then we were kind of grooving, right? Because I was like, well, so what are some examples of things that you did where you thought that, confidence and conviction would really help you and it did not. And so he had this story um, about becoming president of his school's they call it the house, which is like the school's well-being club. It was a specific room in the school. And we talked about how essentially like he kind of he was VP, he was really happy in that role. The president actually quit because she was too overwhelmed by the role. And so then he suddenly is in this presidency and he's like I'm not ready for this, right? But he did his best. And so what he decided to do was like, okay, I'm gonna just lead with ultimate confidence. I am going to like be decisive and be that leader, essentially. And these are qualities that he all learned through debate and speech. So, long story short, the essay ends up being kind of about how he realizes that those skills he developed in debate, um, like were are still great skills to have, but like he had to learn when to pull those back, and how he has learned to incorporate this lesson from the house where the board really went to him. They're like, this is too much, dude. Like you're doing too much." Um, then he ultimately kind of completely changed tune and made his leadership, um, like tactics from there very, very collaborative. Like no idea was too small to be discussed, right? So he really corrected course. And like he also actually learned to be a lot more collaborative when it came to his debate practice as well. So I thought that that was like a really cool way for us to encapsulate some themes about him. We talk about his skills as a debater, which is a really fundamental thing to him, but also like he is such a people person. So having him be president, like talking about his presidency of this well-being club, having it be a little bit funny, it felt like it really imparted his overall essence, I would say. Um, so that's an example of how we were able to really pick like just one or two answers from this intake and turn it into like a really great, like funny, vulnerable, insightful, and successful personal statement. And again, getting to this theme of curiosity, this was a bit of a tough one because he's like really interested in studying business. But I would say that he hasn't taken that many business classes. There was just not much for him to substantiate that interest. However, he does do a ton of independent research on a lot of things. So when it comes to the this essay, which I don't know if anyone can guess what topic I would file this under. I file this under why major or why academic topic, right? Um, so he definitely needed to talk about some independent work that he did when it came to this. But this is something we'll be able to repurpose for regular decision because he's definitely going to need to write about his interest in economics and politics because that's what he wants to study. So that's something where like we could have done this and written about a hobby he has. Initially, he was going to write about theater because he's also very involved in theater. Um, we just couldn't find like much there, and he spends so much time on theater that that's clear in his application, like that's clear in his activities section. That I just thought like, okay, well, let's talk about this intellectual interest and let's get to that theme of curiosity. And when he becomes interested in something, he really runs at it and like learns as much as he can about it, and that's kind of like the implicit message of this essay. Okay, this I would say is bonus. All right, everybody, let's see. What time is it? Um, what time is it? It's 8:45. If anyone wants to stick around for this case study, you are more than welcome to. But in general, we will be sending this webinar recording. I think next week, latest, with a couple of other things. So if you've got to run, have dinner, or whatever, it's all good. Thank you so much for digging in and staying with me tonight. For those who do want to stay, please feel free to stay, and I'll take you through this case study, and then we'll leave a little bit of time for Q&A. Okay. Um, all right. So this is a student that I worked with last year. Oh, she is wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Like, this is my caveat that I had said when we were talking about application scoring. Scoring is all relative, right? A student who is a one at Harvard, well, a student who's a one at a school that's a little bit less selective is going to be a little bit, that one is going to look different at Harvard. So let's look into Kelsey. And this is her general profile. And this is generally like the way that an admissions officer has to distill a student's application uh, during that first reading, right? They're taking notes on things like course rigor, they're taking notes on SAT score, definitely they're recording GPA, they're taking notes on her background as well. That's a really important thing. Um, every single every single college admissions office part of the work is okay, we need to know what school the student comes from and we need to see that school profile, right? Because you can't penalize a student for not taking 10 APs when the school only offers 2 APs. So Tenafly is known to be obviously a pretty competitive, a very competitive school. So the expectation is really high for a student coming from Tenafly because the average ACT at Tenafly is 31 out of 36. That's really high. Like the average ACT at a lot of other schools is going to look probably more in like the 20s, mid 20s, I would say. But Tenafly is just so well resourced that they have a great average ACT. So she had got a 34. It was a labor of love, but it was great. She was interested in Vanderbilt, Wake, Michigan. Her general strengths of her application were absolutely her extracurriculars. They were unbelievable, which is good because she was looking to major in pre-med, and that is a really competitive field when it comes to college applications. She did struggle a little bit with like a lower GPA her freshman year. We did an additional information essay all about that to just cover our ground. When it comes to her application, like her application and scoring, I think it's good for everyone to sort of think about how they would score this student, put your admissions officer hat on. Um, Her academics were very strong. Look at this GPA, 4.337 weighted, tons and tons and tons of APs. She did a science capstone program. So, like, she's in the running. I would say she was in the top 25% of all ACT scores for Wake Forest. Her GPA is really high. So I would put her at a two plus maybe, or when it comes to early decision students, she probably was in a higher category, I think. Um, So definitely strong academics, which means great, you are a qualified candidate. And again, the question comes, what else, right? So Wake Forest is a fun one because they have seven supplemental essays. So we had our work cut out for us, certainly. Um, and one of the essays was about basically I guess Maya Angelou, I don't know if she went there or what. She, it's objectively, it really is objectively too many essays. It's very arrogant, if you ask me. But anyway, this essay was basically all about pick a Maya Angelou quote and how you talk about how you live that quote out. And I forget what the quote was. But we, again, were leading with like the content we knew we wanted to write about for her. She wrote this essay basically about a really impressive research project that she did. She put also the research abstract in her additional information essay, which is a nice touch and a good thing to do if you do have a research paper. Um, Thematically, I think one thing that I found out about Kelsey was that she does not shy away from challenging herself. This example, like this essay specifically, was all about how, so she showed up to this opportunity, and the other people that were there were like actual professional doctors that she was working with. She's like, okay, so there's like a nurse from Korea. There's like a PhD student from Penn. There's like all of these really, really accomplished people. And then there's me, and I have no idea what I'm even looking at. I'm trying to Google these terms. I have no clue. And so it's really just all about how she navigated that. Initially, she tried to sort of hide and kind of fade into the background. But the story ultimately is about how she thought better of that and said, okay, well, wait a minute. Like, it's going to be obvious that I don't know anything. So why don't I instead lean into that and just ask as many questions as I possibly can, take advantage of these professionals that I have in front of me. And that is something that really like drove her progress in this program. That ultimately she contributed her own um, like segment of research to this project, which is pretty awesome. So yeah, like this is not about necessarily she didn't have to contribute her own piece of research for this to be the essay. This project doesn't have to be like so impressive and stilted for this to be the essay. It's the principle of this is a student who like is going to find her way through really difficult um and overwhelming experiences by like you know being honest about what she doesn't know, and then also like working really hard to kind of like close that gap. And I think this did make that argument, which I think went into her favor. Um, Now let's talk about her strong point. Absolutely, her activities. It was crazy. Like, how do you have time to do this? She got her EMT certification all the way through this, which I don't know if anyone knows what that takes, but it's like your whole weekends. And so she did some amazing work, and I would definitely count her at, I'd say she was an extracurricular one, which I think definitely helped her chances for Wake Forest, 100%. Let's talk personal score. And let me get my screen out of the way. So, I said a lot actually in the beginning of this about, hey, don't write about your personal traumas for your personal statement. Um, I do believe that to be true. Sometimes a student will come to me and say, I have to write about this. I want to, and I can, and I will. And so Kelsey was that case. She had like a really, really long, 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 long medical trauma around her teeth. And like it really got in the way of her high school career, like her social life. She tells like some really, really memorable anecdotes about like some experiences she had with this that really um I think made her feel like she missed out on some things that like a lot of high schoolers take for granted. Um this story was this was a hard essay to write because again it was about a really loaded thing. Um, but eventually, kind of what we land on is she is such an inquisitive person. Um, And ultimately, what she did with this whole experience, even though she's interested in the medical field, she just was so tired of hearing bad news that she like stopped. She stopped asking questions about what was going on with her process, with her teeth, with everything. She just kind of became resigned to it. Um, Ultimately, she has this kind of inciting event that makes her rethink that approach, and then just says, "Well, why don't I?" Again, you'll sense a theme here. Why don't I lean into this process and why don't I just use this as a learning opportunity for me? I want to study medicine. I have this doctor's ear. Like, why don't I just embrace this and, like empower myself through the knowledge of what is going to happen to me and and how can I apply that to other people, right? Ultimately, she does talk about um like how she turned around the way she processed her experience and her pain, but she also talks about like how she helps others do it. So by gently informing people of what's going on with them in their body when they feel scared or pain, that can be a really powerful thing. And so she's like learned to wield that power as well through her own work as an EMT. So obviously that is really like such a lovely story of this person um, like learning to empower herself and other people through like the struggles that she's had. Okay, this is another example of an essay that she did. I'm not going to take you through this one. This is um a different general category. I don't think we've seen this yet. Well, intellectual curiosity could also be why major. So if you wanted to get a jump on those Wake Forest essays, that would be one way to do it. Oh, here we go. Here's the example of the research project she did. My peers, a physician from Korea, a researcher from China, a medical student from Rutgers, and an undergraduate from Pitt. Can you imagine being 17 and going through that? Like immediately, I was like, that's fascinating. We should write about that. Um, and here's an example of one of her top 10 lists, which was really fun, cute, nothing crazy. So her personal score, I think with the story probably got her a 2 or a 1. Like she definitely experienced a lot of adversity. I think she's a classic, like was a great fit for Wake Forest, so that definitely helped. She also was really, really, really communicative with her admissions officer, which is something I recommend you all definitely do if you have a dream school in mind. Reach out to that person, communicate with them, give them updates on how you're doing. Don't spam them, but come up with like really good substantive, steady outreach, like quarterly or monthly. Um, all right. I think she overall got in likely because I think her extracurriculars were fabulous. Her essays were very thoughtful and well thought out. She hit that benchmark of academics that she needed to, and um, clearly, like institutionally, they had a need to fill, their pre-med slot, and she was going to occupy that space. So yeah, I think, the ED strategy of it all also was really helpful. She ended up getting in October. The admissions officer said, if you apply early, we'll be able to tell you early. So we definitely leveraged that advantage as well. This is a final case study, but honestly, I want to actually just leave it to Q&A and leave this offer on the table. You'll be hearing from us, so if you're interested in this 5-hour essay booster, probably like best for seniors, but we also do have larger packages for juniors that are more 10, 20 hours. Definitely feel free to reach out. We would love to work with you. I think like learning more about students obviously is something I'm super passionate about, and I know that's the same for Kate, other Kate, and all of our advisors here. So we hope you see how beneficial the support of an advisor can be. But if nothing else, I really hope you've just found some helpful tidbits from this talk. Um, any questions, I will leave it open in the chat for these last few minutes. Um, And if not, you are all free to go. So thank you so much for spending your evening with us. And looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you, Marcus. Okay. Thank you, Betsy.